When I was a child, I'd often wake up to the sound of my grandmother chanting. Her voice would drift from her bedroom, calm and steady, mixed with the scent of incense from a small altar. She was reciting the Heart Sutra.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand the words, of course, just the rhythm. Yate, date, haratete. But as I got older, I learned the text. And one line always seemed to stop me in my tracks, like a perfect, impossible riddle. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form.
That's the heart of it, isn't it?
It really is. Logically, it feels like nonsense. Form is form. It's the chair I'm sitting on, the world I see, the very things we build our lives around. Our whole society is based on mastering form, on knowing more about it.
Right, on defining and categorizing.
Exactly. But that single line points to a completely different kind of wisdom. Not the kind you get from collecting facts, but the kind that arises when you let go of knowing altogether. It's an intelligence that quietly observes the mind itself and then goes one step further. It dissolves the observer.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
That profound intelligence is what we are diving into today. The ancient Buddhist concept of Hanyā, or prajna, and its core teaching of emptiness. Our mission is a deep exploration into how this philosophical, seemingly paradoxical idea provides practical, philosophical, and psychological solutions to the most pressing modern crises, from mastering personal anxiety to navigating ethical challenges in global leadership.
Yeah, it's incredibly relevant.
We are essentially seeking maybe a shortcut to profound psychological and existential peace, drawn from centuries of observation.
What's absolutely crucial, I think, to make a distinction right at the beginning between different types of knowledge. Hanyā is often simply translated as wisdom, but that translation, well, it severely limits its meaning.
How so?
There is the ordinary practical knowledge, the cleverness we use to solve day-to-day problems, known in Japanese as shi. Hanyā, in contrast, is the wisdom that transcends the conventional. It is not about collecting facts. It is an intuitive, direct, a universal insight into the absolute true nature of reality. It forces us to move beyond our typical, rigid, dualistic thinking.
The constant this versus that.
Exactly. Self versus other, existence versus non-existence, or permanent versus temporary. It's the ability to see things as they truly are, which is almost always counterintuitive to our normal perception.
Okay, let's unpack this transcendent wisdom, Hanyā. If it's the ability to see things as they truly are, what is that true state of things? The Hanyā wisdom reveals the concept of ku, or emptiness shunyata. What exactly does that look like when you look at the world through this lens?
Right. So when Hanyā allows the mind to perceive ku directly, it reveals the radical truth that nothing, no object, no phenomenon, no thought, no relationship possesses a fixed, independent self.
Nothing has a core, unchanging itness.
Precisely. This radical non-existence of a fixed essence is the definition of emptiness. The technical term for this fixed intrinsic essence is svabhava. Nagarjuna, the 2nd century philosopher who formalized this Madhyamaka, or middle way school of thought, insisted that everything lacks svabhava. It lacks self-being, intrinsic essence, or permanent existence.
And here's where many Western minds, including mine sometimes, hit a philosophical wall. When we strip an object of its fixed existence, we assume we're left with nothingness, a void, just poof. Why isn't Nagarjuna saying everything disappears?
Because the entire point is that emptiness is not nothingness. It's actually the necessary condition for things to appear at all. The critical equation to grasp is this. Dependent arising, pritithasamutpada, is declared as emptiness, shunyata.
They're the same thing.
Fundamentally, yes. Point to the same reality. If something does not have an independent essence, or svabhava, it logically means it must exist relationally.
Oh, okay.
Nothing arises, remains, or ceases on its own. All phenomena appear only in a web of causal relationships. They're dependent on everything else.
So if I apply this to my own identity, the absence of svabhava means I'm not a fixed, isolated entity sitting here. I'm the result of the air, the coffee I had, the food I ate, the memories I have, the relationships I maintain right now, all of it.
That is the consequence, exactly. The rejection of intrinsic essence gives rise to this fluid relational existence. Some philosophers use the term metaxy, or the in-between, to describe this state.
The in-between, I like that.
Existence isn't a collection of isolated items. It's the dynamism of constant interdependence. And this perspective instantly challenges the dominant paradigms that have shaped Western thought since, ancient Greece, where philosophy often sought fixed, permanent forms like Plato or atomic independent substances.
Right. We are trained to find the pin, to nail reality down. Our scientific and social constructs often focus on finding the fixed object, the atomic entity, or the individual self. We want that solid ground.
And Nagarjuna's method, called negative dialectics, was designed explicitly to dismantle that tendency of, let's call it, ontological clinging. He didn't propose a new fixed truth. His method was purely systematic rejection.
How did that work?
He would take any concept, say identity, and demonstrate how every possible definition of that person, physical body, memories, relationships, soul, whatever, also lacks svabhava. It couldn't stand alone. By dismantling every fixed category, the mind is forced to recognize the underlying fluidity, thereby breaking the rigid subject-object dichotomy we usually operate with.
But doesn't that inherently introduce a massive danger? I mean, if you successfully dismantle the idea of fixed existence, surely people accuse you of inviting nihilism, the belief that nothing matters. That seems like the immediate worry.
That is the absolute tightrope of the middle way, the madhyamaka. Nagarjuna is incredibly careful to avoid two extremes: eternalism, the belief in absolute fixed existence, and nihilism, the belief in absolute void or destruction.
Okay, so it's a path between those two.
Exactly. The middle way acknowledges that there is a conventional reality, sapiti sadhya, the reality of the chair, the sound of my voice, the laws of gravity. This conventional reality is absolutely necessary, and we must use it, including the Buddha, the teachings, the arguments themselves, to reach liberation.
We need it to function.
We need it. But we must never mistake this limited functional truth for the ultimate truth, paramartha satya, which is emptiness. The conventional exists dependently. The ultimate truth is the recognition of that very dependency.
It sounds like conventional reality is a functional tool, the map maybe, but ultimate reality is the insight, the territory itself. This distinction between functional reality and absolute reality perfectly frames a crisis we see even in modern science. You mentioned an anecdote about a brilliant physics student.
Yes, this story profoundly bridges the gap between ancient insight and modern physics. This student was, extremely successful academically, grounded in the certainty of classical mechanics where objects have definite position and momentum. Predictable.
Solid rules.
Right. When he entered the quantum realm, dealing with superposition, entanglement, and the probabilistic nature of reality, he felt a crushing sense of ontological dread. His entire Western framework told him that if the electron doesn't have a fixed location until it's measured, then his reality, too, must be some kind of illusion. He felt adrift in what he perceived as a meaningless void.
His crisis wasn't about the math. It was about the philosophical implications of uncertainty. He was seeing emptiness as a loss of substance, a terrifying nothingness.
Precisely. His conceptual model required fixity for meaning, but his aha moment arrived when a mentor introduced him to that Heart Sutra line: form is emptiness, emptiness is form. He realized that what quantum physics was detailing with incredibly complex equations, that reality is a cloud of probabilities, a potential field. This ancient wisdom declared as a foundational truth millennia ago. The emptiness isn't a void or a loss of substance, it is the sheer potential for all form. His identity wasn't an illusion, it was limitless. A temporary relational form arising from an infinite dynamic source. This insight is deeply liberating because it removes the desperation to pin down certainty, allowing him to work within probability without experiencing that existential collapse.
That philosophical realization, moving from fixed certainty to dynamic potential, that must have massive implications for our internal landscape, right? If we stop trying to define and fix external reality, how does Hanyā reshape our internal emotional world?
Oh, it initiates a profound psychological transformation. In contemporary Western psychology, we rely heavily on metacognition, the idea of observing one's own thoughts and emotions from a distance. It's a critical tool of the intellect. We create an observing self to try and manage the chaos of our thoughts.
Right. We often use the good self to police or manage the bad self or the anxious self. It's kind of an internal dualism where awareness is used to maintain control, like an internal manager.
Exactly. Hanyā takes a critical step beyond this managerial process. It doesn't stop at observing the mind. It dissolves the observer itself.
Dissolves the observer. How?
The boundary between the watcher and the watched fades away, because the self that was doing the watching is discovered to have no fixed essence, vava, either. Nagarjuna argued that the illusion of this fixed, persistent entity, the self, is the very thing that causes suffering, because we endlessly try to protect and defend what is fundamentally undefinable and impermanent.
Wait, if the observing self dissolves, doesn't that feel inherently risky, like letting go of the steering wheel? We've been trained our whole lives that self-awareness is the pinnacle of psychological health, the bedrock of control. How do we trust the mechanism that is dissolving the very thing we rely on for safety?
That is the precise point of resistance, and it's why the wisdom is so powerful and maybe a bit scary at first. We are not dissolving awareness itself. We are dissolving the clinging to a fixed conceptual self that supposedly owns that awareness.
Okay. It's the ownership part.
Yes. The anxiety comes from the mistaken belief that there is a permanent I that is perpetually under threat. When that belief dissolves, the awareness remains, but it is non-dual. It simply is the experience without the burden of self-judgment or ownership. It's just happening.
This realization is vividly illustrated in the anecdote you shared about Yumi, the young woman dealing with debilitating anxiety.
Yes, Yumi's story is a classic case of what you might call a therapeutic plateau. She had successfully used Western cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which helped her identify her irrational negative thought patterns and challenge them. She became excellent at noticing and correcting her catastrophic thoughts.
So CBT worked to a point.
To a point. But she described her life as a constant, exhausting internal war, constantly policing a sick self. Her anxiety was managed, but she was deeply unhappy and felt trapped by the sheer effort required to maintain this distance, this internal battle.
She had successfully mastered metacognition, observing her thoughts, but still suffered from the split, the watcher versus the watched.
Exactly. The dualism remained intact. The shift came when a counselor, familiar with Hanyā wisdom, asked the key, dissolving question during a therapy session. Who is the you that is observing this panic? Where does that specific self exist? Can you find it?
That's a deep question to ask someone in panic.
It is. When Yumi next faced a severe panic attack, instead of fighting the feeling or trying to manage it from afar, she followed the instruction. She searched internally for the fixed, solid self that was supposed to be watching and judging the anxiety. And in that intense moment, the search failed. She couldn't locate it. The separation collapsed.
What was the result of that collapse? What did she feel?
The profound realization was that there was not a separate intrinsic self having anxiety. There was just anxiety as a transient relational experience, a sensation, a chemical rush, a series of thoughts, all arising and passing. By allowing the self that supposedly owned the anxiety to dissipate, she stopped fighting the experience itself.
And the terror.
The terror, starved of the self-concept it was clinging to, simply dissolved. It lost its fuel. That is the therapeutic power of realizing the emptiness of the self-concept. The suffering caused by self-clinging is alleviated, sometimes dramatically.
It is truly fascinating to see how secular mindfulness-based therapies like acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, implicitly incorporate this emptiness philosophy even without using the spiritual language.
The mechanism is functionally very similar, yes. The underlying goal of ACT, for example, is to alleviate suffering caused by what they call cognitive fusion, a mistaken belief in the essential reality of thoughts, feelings, or the conceptual self.
Believing our thoughts are reality.
Right. ACT sees the problem as mistaking language-created reality, our internal stories and self-concepts, as having intrinsic existence, as having svabhava. The solution is to train the mind, through techniques like cognitive diffusion, to see the emptiness of this conceptual entanglement, to see thoughts as thoughts.
And
DBT, similarly, guides the patient away from rigid, overly realist thinking towards seeing all things, including behaviors and intense emotions, as fluid, transient, and empty of fixed identity. It encourages dialectical thinking, holding apparent opposites, which is very much in line with the middle way's rejection of extremes.
If we can quantify this shift, perhaps measure it.
Yeah.
What does the research say about moving toward a non-dual state of mind and its impact on well-being? Is there data on this?
Yes, there is. We have empirical data specifically linking non-dual awareness, or NDA, to emotional regulation. NDA is defined by researchers as a state of consciousness where no distinctions between self and the outside world are established, characterized by calmness, unity, and inner quiet. Essentially, the temporary realization of relational existence, of emptiness.
Okay, so how was this state measured, and what did it tell us about emotional life?
Researchers used instruments like the Non-Dual Awareness Dimensional Assessment, NADA, to measure the trait like a long-term tendency and state momentary experience presence of NDA. They compared this with measures like the Positive and Negative Affect Schedule, PANAS, to gauge aversional experience.
And the results?
They found a positive but moderate correlation between NDA, both trait and state, and positive affect, with correlation coefficients around RL over 0.4 and RL over 0.5, respectively. This suggests that the less fixed the internal division between self and other, the more positivity, connection, and unity an individual tends to experience.
That makes sense. What about the connection to negative emotions? That's often what people are really trying to manage or reduce.
Right. The relationship with negative affect was negative as expected, but notably weak, with coefficients around RO 0.00 and ROLOS 0.05.
Weak, so it doesn't just erase negative feelings.
No, and this result is crucial and requires careful interpretation. It doesn't mean NDA instantly eliminates all sadness, anger, or pain. Life still happens. Rather, the negative trend suggests that NDA helps in decreasing the excessive and, maybe most importantly, the self-evaluative manifestations of negative feelings.
Ah, the extra layer we add on top.
Exactly. When the fixed self-concept dissolves, you reduce the tendency to judge, amplify, and ruminate on negative emotions. You simply experience them more directly, without the added layer of self-condemnation or story-making. This is where the improved emotional regulation and resilience come from. It's less about eliminating negativity and more about changing our relationship to it.
That brings us back to the crucial philosophical guardrail, the middle way. If realizing the emptiness of suffering is liberation, what is the risk of misapplying this idea, getting it wrong?
The primary benefit, as we've noted, is profound freedom. Realizing that a source of suffering you believe to be fundamentally real and permanent is actually transient and less fixed than you assumed, that's incredibly liberating.
The risk?
The risk lies precisely in misunderstanding emptiness as absolute nihilism, as just meaninglessness. Nagarjuna himself was extremely wary of this. He warned that an incorrect understanding clinging to emptiness itself as a fixed doctrine or ultimate view can lead to profound despair or moral apathy, a sense that nothing matters. So why bother?
Using emptiness as another fixed belief.
Exactly. He famously stated that those who hold emptiness to be an ultimate view are unsavable because they have simply replaced one fixed substantialist idea, like a permanent self, with another equally fixed emptiness-based idea. True Hanyā wisdom is the skillful, non-clinging application of emptiness, understanding it as a pointer to reality, not reality itself.
We've established Hanyā as a philosophy and a therapy. Now let's look at how this wisdom of non-fixity, of impermanence, permeates everyday life, specifically in Japanese culture, where this understanding has been deeply ingrained for centuries.
Absolutely. Hanyā wisdom is intrinsically linked to the acceptance of impermanence, a concept so deeply hardwired into the Japanese psyche that it actually predates Buddhism's arrival. It stems partly from the indigenous Shinto faith, which emphasizes fluid kami, spiritual entities, and nature's cyclical patterns. This blended seamlessly with Buddhism's central teaching that all things are transient and everything with physical form will eventually perish.
The natural world seems to be the primary instructor for this philosophical truth, doesn't it?
It really does. The natural cycles constantly reinforce the idea that existence is temporary and relational. We see this embodied in practices like the annual collective appreciation of sakura, the cherry blossom.
Ah, yes, the cherry blossoms.
The beauty is completely inseparable from its fragility and fleeting nature. This focus teaches the aesthetic concept known as mana no aware, the poignant appreciation of fleeting beauty. The profound realization is not just that the beauty will end, but that its very finiteness makes it beautiful, discouraging the grasping for permanence.
And this sense of appreciating the moment, the fleetingness, is captured in the tea ceremony too, right?
Yes, very much so. The formal, precise structure of the tea ceremony is paradoxically rooted in profound transience. It is guided by the phrase, ichigo ichi, which translates roughly as one time, one meeting.
One time, one meeting.
It recognizes that because existence is constantly flowing and dependent, each interaction, each breath, each serving of tea is unique and unrepeatable. This shifts focus from preparing for the next time, or regretting the last time, to fully engaging in the present fluid moment. Even the famous Edo period woodblock prints, ukiyo-e, literally translates as pictures of the floating world, a direct Buddhist term for the impermanence of human life.
This pervasive cultural acceptance of impermanence seems to be the very foundation of resilience in times of profound crisis. It doesn't necessarily lead to fatalism, does it? It seems to lead to immediate action.
That is the practical power of Hanyā, correctly understood. If you accept the impermanence of a devastating situation, you are liberated from the despair of trying to fix or restore a permanent past that's gone. Instead, you focus immediately on what you can affect in the present fluid situation. We saw this heartbreakingly, but also inspiringly, demonstrated in communities recovering from the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in 2011.
Can you elaborate on the recovery in places like Kisenuma? That was hit so hard.
Keisanuma, which suffered catastrophic damage, demonstrated a resilience that often baffled outside observers. Instead of succumbing entirely to shock and prolonged mourning, the local community almost immediately began the process of rebuilding. This wasn't denial. It was based on the acceptance that the damage was unnegotiable, and the power of the ocean was a fluid reality, not a permanent enemy to be beaten into submission.
The old form was gone, but the potential remained.
Exactly. The physical reality was destroyed, but the potential for form remained. The most poignant example, perhaps, was a local sake brewer whose facility was devastated, but miraculously, 2 fermentation tanks survived. He managed to get the brewery functional and began production the day after the tsunami receded.
The day after? Wow.
That finished sake, ready just 10 days later, became a tangible symbol of the town's revitalization or rebirth. It was a powerful declaration that form had arisen again from emptiness, not an act of defiant permanence against nature, but an act of dynamic flow with nature's impermanence.
This high-level, systemic, non-dual thinking is incredibly valuable, it seems, in high-stakes fields like contemporary corporate strategy, where crises are so often framed in rigid binaries: succeed or fail, cut or don't cut, us versus them.
Yes, and we had that striking anecdote about Mr. Iso, a senior manager in Osaka, who faced exactly this dualistic pressure. His global headquarters mandated deep cost-cutting, specifically requiring him to identify and eliminate the bottom 10% of his department.
A horrible position to be in. The standard playbook demands a tough, fixed choice. Save the company by sacrificing employees, or save the employees by disobeying headquarters and risking the company's stability. Binary.
Indeed, a classic lose-lose framed as a choice. But Ito-san approached this with Hanyā wisdom, utilizing a non-dual perception. He rejected the cut-don't-cut binary because he saw that both the problem, his department's high costs, and the solution, some kind of systemic restructuring, were entangled and lacked fixed boundaries. They weren't separate things.
How did he frame that?
He often used the analogy of a gardener. A good gardener doesn't fix a struggling tree by just cutting off its worst branches. They look at the whole system, the soil, the water, the sunlight, understanding that the health of the tree is relational, interdependent.
So how did he apply that relational view to a rigid corporate mandate like cut 10%?
He realized the fixed identity of his department itself was part of the perceived problem. So instead of firing his 10%, he proposed merging his entire technical training department with the struggling operations of a key but currently non-profitable supplier.
Merging? That's radical.
It was. It required both entities to accept the impermanence of their old roles and systems. His team lost its separate identity as the training department, and the supplier gained necessary expertise while integrating closer into the main company's flow. This radical fluidity avoided layoffs, secured a vital supply chain, and ultimately created a stronger, more resilient, and ethically sound system. It worked because it recognized the shared, interdependent existence of the entities involved. It was a refusal to cling to the fixed boundary of my department versus the supplier.
And this brings us back to the ethical implication of emptiness you mentioned earlier. Compassion, or karun. It seems compassion isn't just a nice moral choice, but almost a logical necessity rooted in non-dual awareness.
Exactly. Karun rises logically from Hanyā wisdom. When we realize existence is fundamentally relational and interconnected, when we truly recognize that there is no truly separate other, because nothing is fixed svabhava, no inherent separation, we are compelled to act with compassion.
Because harming them is harming the whole system, which includes us.
Precisely. Caring for others is not purely altruism in this view. It is a form of maintenance of our own shared relational existence. If everything is interdependent, harm to the other is ultimately harm to the self, because the boundary is illusory. The rejection of fixed entities results in an unavoidable relational ethics.
To bring this powerful, paradoxical concept full circle, there is a profound duality in the word Hanyā itself that perfectly captures this connection between intense human passion and ultimate enlightenment.
That is perhaps the most potent symbol of this teaching, yes. The word Hanyā refers both to 1, supreme Buddhist wisdom, prajna, the ultimate insight into emptiness, and 2, the fearsome female demon mask, Hanyā no men, used in traditional No theater.
The mask. Yes, it's terrifying.
It is immediately recognizable and quite frightening. 2 sharp horns, massive fangs like tusks, metallic glaring eyes, and an open mouth contorted in agonizing rage or sorrow. It typically represents a woman consumed and transformed by overwhelming jealousy, resentment, or unfulfilled desire, like the famous character Lady Rokuju in the Tale of Genji.
Why on earth is the term for ultimate wisdom connected to ultimate agonizing rage? They seem like direct opposites.
Because in Buddhist philosophy, passions, bon, which are the source of suffering, and enlightenment, bodhi, are not seen as separate opposing objects. They are two sides of the same coin, two potential relational forms arising from the same mind. The Hanyā mask symbolizes the raw, untransformed power of the human struggle with intense emotion. The transformation into the demonic state is the result of clinging to these desires and the conceptual self that feels wronged or deprived.
So the mask is a visual representation of the philosophical principle. A warning, maybe.
It's a profound teaching tool. It shows that the wisdom of Hanyā awaits on the other side of these extreme emotions, but it is accessed by confronting and realizing the emptiness of the emotions and the self that owns them, not by suppressing or denying them. You have to go through them, understand their lack of inherent reality.
So the path to wisdom involves engaging with the demon.
In a sense, yes. Recognizing the demon as empty form. The mask itself is not just fear. It's a representation of the intense human struggle and the possibility of transcendence beyond the fixation on intense dualistic emotions like jealousy or rage. Whether the mask is painted white, representing aristocratic refinement whose jealousy is perhaps more hidden but still potent, red, representing raw, visceral anger, or black, representing the deepest, darkest, most deeply rooted grudges, they all symbolize that same core human struggle toward wisdom, which requires recognizing the impermanence and emptiness of the passions themselves. So the central finding we really must reiterate from this expansive deep dive is that Hanyā wisdom, this profound understanding of emptiness, is not a passive concept. It's not just something to believe. It's an active, powerful tool for transformation.
Right, it does something.
It does. It does not work by imposing a new structure or a fixed ideology onto you, but by systematically dismantling the deeply rooted illusion of fixed, independent existence. Whether that illusion is a fixed external world, a fixed anxious self, or a fixed operational boundary in a company.
What we ultimately learn from this journey then, from Nagarjuna's careful logic to the dynamic resilience of a community post-tsunami, to that manager in Osaka, is that true freedom and profound psychological well-being seem to begin when you let go of the desperate clinging to certainty. When you stop mistaking the passing waves of emotion or thought for your fixed self and realize that emptiness is not a terrifying void or a loss of meaning, but actually the dynamic source of all potential and thus all possibility for rebirth and transformation. It's the space where everything can happen.